famous for.
It's true, in a certain country it exists. I mean, I drive from Kenya to Tanzania to get here by 4 hours, and we were stuck.
That's very nice of you. Oh, sorry, you were stuck. Yeah.
We were stuck at the checkpoint between the two countries, and actually we spent nearly 2 hours our document to be checked
well, there you are. So why should people come back to that kind of thing? No welfare state in a lot of countries in Africa, or most countries in Africa. I mean, that kind of, you talk about security, but actually that's one of the things that African countries on the whole lack. There's no safety net when things go wrong. No. Is there?
I mean, there's a challenge still. I have to admit, I'm not saying everything is correct, and but to make a business you have to take a risk.
And talking about the diaspora, I mean, there are those, unlike you, who don't necessarily want to actually physically relocate here, but we hear that there are figures something like $50 billion which Africans invest outside of Africa, saving, when they work in Europe or America or whatever, and people are trying to set up this diaspora fund whereby they bring money from the diaspora to actually invest in the economies of their native countries. Yeah. I mean, that's one way that the diaspora can actually contribute, I suppose, to the wealth of the nation.
I mean, the money coming from the diaspora, as you said, is a 50 billion being estimated. Also, direct foreign investment, I think last year it's been estimated to $80 billion coming to Africa.
And the figures all just fluctuate. No, the 53 billion I was referring to was what I think diaspora and Africans actually save. I think the figure of remittances, at least officially, it's probably much more unofficially, is I think $40 billion a year. Then 2010 sounds about right. Yeah. But it's going to be much more than that, isn't it, really? You don't know what people are taking in their suitcases, let's face it.
Yeah, but I think it's also a good point.
Not using your services, Abdirashid, sorry to say. No commission for you on that one.
But I think to your point, it's not just about people coming back, but because we can work in such a global way, it's like what influence does the diaspora play in Africa without even necessarily physically coming back?
10 years ago was a continent with, let's be frank, I mean, the economists call it hopeless continent. Now it's called hopeful.
That's right, 10 years ago the economists did call it the hopeless continent. They have since revised that opinion, I think. Okay, so the two of you.
Yeah, with hopeful continent.
Well, there you are, so the two of you clearly big advocates there of technology-led development in Africa. Okay, well, thanks for the moment. We're going to take a short break, but do stay with us here on Rendezvous Africa with me, Zeinab Badawi, coming to you from Tanzania. Rendezvous with you. Hello and welcome back to Rendezvous Africa with me, Zeinab Badawi, here in Arusha, Tanzania. And joining my guests, Isis Nyongo and Abdirashid Duale, is one of the most highly respected people on the continent, who's been both a president of the African Development Bank and a finance minister for Ghana. Kwame Fojo, welcome to Rendezvous.
Thanks a lot, Zina.
And I should use your honorific Kantinka, which means you're really a lord as far as the Ashantis, you're from the Ashanti tribe, are concerned.
Yes, it's a title given to any Ashanti who is able to keep his promise. I must say that although I'm the only one called Kantinka, even after my death, it will have to remain 50 years before it will be given to another person.
My goodness. Now, you have this overview of the continent, talking about, is Africa the future? We've seen new dawns, renaissance in Africa. We're talking about the African, it's the 21st century and so on. With the wisdom of your experience, do you think that this is just a flash in the pan, or is there something real this time?
There is something real behind it. It is not a flash in the pan. As you may recall, China is passing through that phase. India has done it. In fact, even Vietnam is doing it. It's now the turn of Africa to showcase whatever.
Because you worked with the World Bank in the 70s when you were actually in charge of India for them, and people are now talking about the African lions meet the Asian tigers. Is that where you see African countries on the whole, that they're on that kind of threshold?
I saw the genesis in India from 1965 when I was working with Mrs. Indira Gandhi. All that we had to do was to map out how agriculture was going to be stage, and the results are showing now.
When people talk about the green revolution that we saw in the 70s in India and elsewhere on the subcontinent, and you look at what governments were investing, it was about 20% of their budget. African countries are doing well to invest 10% of their budgets at the moment in agriculture.
Well, you're right, but here, if I may be permitted to talk about Prime Minister Singh. Prime Minister Singh and myself...
You're talking about Manmohan Singh of India.
We were in the bank together.
That's right, he was an economist.
And we used to talk about how our respective continents, could be made to grow. Now, Africa now has to turn attention to agriculture. If you take Ghana, for instance, we're lucky now, we now have oil, we now have minerals, but we're not going the Dutch way. We're not going to make the oil a curse for Ghana.
Ghana is has the fastest growing economy, about 12% a year in Africa. I mean, overnight in 2010 it seemed to become a middle income country. But just give us an idea of what it's like now for you, having lived in Ghana, just seeing the differences now.
I shouldn't personalize it, but I could go to Accra, open the door, go to Kumasi, open the door.
Kumasi is in Ashanti region.
And then go to my village and open the door.
What do you mean by open the door?
I've got houses.
Instead of going through a mud hut?
Yes, I go into a decent air-conditioned house.
That's the definition of a middle-income country. You open the door and you've got air conditioning. You've lived through Ghana being in extreme poverty all those years ago. To see it become, again, the sort of golden star of Africa, as you say, transformed by its offshore oil revenues. But there are worries, frankly, that that growth is not inclusive, is it? It
is not inclusive, I will agree with you. We still have, slums. We still have a lot of people below the poverty line. We need to do a lot more.
All right. So you have to look beyond the figures. When I think to become a middle-income country, you have to have something like $1,500 on average per capita per year. But some people have much, much more, and people have much less.
Skewed.
You're talking about this new Africa. Then you look at what's going on in Guinea-Bissau and Mali, where you've had, a coup in Guinea-Bissau, Mali being sliced in half, and so on. I mean, is that the new Africa, Kwame?
No, we've moved away from that. I have lived, in Ghana, as far as I can remember, through 3 coups. In fact, I might even say 4. But now, the rule of law is what is obtaining in Ghana. Anyone who is disturbed by a soldier, he goes to court. It is now more or less the Switzerland of West Africa. It should have come much longer if we hadn't been, disturbed by the coups. Ghana, when we got independence in '57, was well on the way of becoming the first African country that would have got to the middle income level. As
it
far
had
back,
lots of gold in the Ashanti
Malaysia, Singapore, and Ghana got independence the same time. Malaysia came and took oil palm from Ghana to go and grow in Malaysia. Where are they? They are ahead of us because there was no coup.
So you think the coup has held back Ghana very much? Okay, African leaders with their hands in the state coffers in the till. Corruption is something we've always associated with Africa. Is that, again, something you are going to put in the past along with the military coups?
I think we have a tough assignment there. It is the one area...
He's honest, isn't he?
Yes, it is. We have a tough assignment there because they all go, instead of making sure that they are doing it for the service of the nation, the first thing they look at is their pocket. And until we are able to set example, serious example, and in this regard, institutions like Switzerland and others ought to help us not to
take all that money that's been taken out. Okay, so that's still a bad point. You agree with that corruption amongst African rulers and politicians?
I think it's a real issue, and one that also links to engagement of new leaders. You know, new leadership. Which young people are actually going to go into public service and things like that. And there's a lot of disillusionment with corruption and kind of previous generations. So that I see as also a challenge. I think there's a lot of rush to the private sector for young people, but not to the public sector. And like we look at that from the future of Africa, what is that?
Abdirashid, what about you?
Of course it will come to rule of law, and good governance will be the key, because if you are worried about the security, you will not invest. So and as Isis mentioned earlier, every country has their own challenge and an opportunity. You cannot generalize all African countries as a one group or other. So, and of course corruption exists in so many parts of the world. It's not a disease exclusively for Africans. Europe, corruption exists, and some other part of the world. So Africa is the future.
And Isis, and also perhaps just tell us how you think, if you agree with that.
When I look kind of to the future, I think that what we'll see is that the relationship between Africa and the world would be much more equal. And I think that at least what I've seen the last experience since the last however odd years is that Africa's always been kind of on the second footing, right? And so a lot of terms are dictated to Africa, and I think that is flipping. There's a lot more options in terms of obviously engagement with the East, engagement within Africa. The amount of investment that's happening of African money investing in different parts of Africa is probably never been larger. So I think that starts to shift the leverage that Africa has with the rest of the world.
But on the whole, you would end on an up note. Well, Isis, as somebody who's often spoken of as this is the future face of Africa, it's very apt then that you end this special series of Rendezvous Africa, which has been coming to you from Arusha in Tanzania. Thank you very much to Isis Nyongo, Abdirashid Duale and Kantinka Kwame Fojo. And that ends this special series of Rendezvous, which has been coming to you from Tanzania. Till our next rendezvous, from me, Zeinab Badawi, and all of the team here, goodbye.